Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. It's been a good few days since I've had a chance to chat with you guys. Hope everything is under control. Tonight, I want to talk a little bit heavy. Gravity is a little bit stronger tonight. We've had a chance to talk with each other about relationships and reasons why things go wrong between boy and girl and their relationships, and they end up break up. And then we discussed and examined this. Let me just turn this off. It won't be okay. So, and we had an opportunity to discuss this whole thing about how to handle the breakups and the pains and different angles and so on and so forth. Now, tonight I want to go a little bit deeper, or far deeper than perhaps I think you deserve it. I think you're entitled to get a little bit deeper in the philosophy of these sort of things, and then judge for yourself if it can be helpful for you for the future, or shed some light on how things were and maybe alleviate a little bit of your pain, or anyhow, a little bit of a more experience and information, knowledge about life, and how perhaps we can have more ammunition to face life and address life and tango with life and negotiate with life. So let's get into it. This is a combination of what relates to our relationships and what has happened, what could happen, and also gives us an insight about how our mind works and what are we noticing and what are we focusing, what are we seeing, and are we seeing things in whole, as a whole, entirety, or are we seeing things in fragments? Now, when I say are we seeing things, it's not like we choose to see things. It means, are we doing what it takes to put us in a position of seeing something in whole? Okay, let's say we want to watch the ocean. We want to look at the ocean. We want to look at the ocean. So we go to the beach, the shore. We go to Hawaii and go to the beach, the shore, and we look at the ocean. So what do we see? We see a big body of water anywhere we look. But is it the entirety of the ocean? Obviously not, because we're standing on the beach, on the shore, and if we turn our head back this way, we're going to end up seeing more of the hotels or the shoreline and sandy beaches, and then palm trees and coconut trees, and then we go up and we see hills and mountains and so on, and then no more ocean. So what are we seeing? We're seeing fragment of the ocean, right? What is the best way that we can see more of the ocean, or entirety of the ocean, or most of the ocean? Well, if we can put ourselves in the center, that means if we can focus and be present in the center of the ocean. I mean, it's logical. If you're center of the ocean, we can pretty much see everywhere, and anywhere we turn, we have a chance to see the entirety of ocean as far as our eyes can go. Let's say our eyes can see, Superman stuff, like, to the end of the oceans. But at least we're in a position that if we were capable of, we can see the entirety, the whole. Because, why? Because in the center of the things. So when we are meeting someone, or let's say instead of just focusing on our girlfriend or someone, if you're a girl and you're the man that you're interested in, instead of focusing on the girlfriend, let's at the same time examine what we will see in the girlfriend that we are getting to know, and also examine our own inner knowledge of what we see of ourselves. So, what do we see of ourselves? What do we see of the girlfriend? Do we see the entirety of the girlfriend, or do we see entirety of ourselves when we try to see ourselves? Well, what is the entirety of me? What is the entirety of your girlfriend? Don't you think your girlfriend's entirety is the movement of her thoughts? So is the same. The entirety of me is the movements of my thoughts. And where is the field that my thoughts having its movements? My consciousness. So your girlfriend is her thoughts, movements, which is herself, is moving in the field of her consciousness. So in order to know her or know yourself, you got to be able to look at the entirety of your consciousness, not just a fragment of your consciousness. The entirety of your consciousness, what is that? That means your beliefs, your interests, your background, your religion, your nationality, your dogmas, your anxieties, your fears, your anything and everything that somehow you stumbled on personally, or somehow it worked its way through your library. Remember, we called in the other productions, we called consciousness of each one of us is like a library in the city, and all the libraries together in the world create the total consciousness available in the cosmos, or on Earth, or the universe, as far as we can see. So let's now talk about then our total consciousness, which is made up, its content is what I just named, a few of them, is what we are trying to see as entirety, and that's when we can really see ourselves. So do we see the whole thing, or do we just see a fragment of it? For example, when you're looking at your girlfriend or getting to know this new girl, well, you see one part of her movement of her mind, how she thinks of herself, or how she does, and that boundaries of the fragment of her thoughts, or where you see her. Maybe you get to know about her fears, or maybe you get to know about how she looks and what she thinks of herself and the kind of confidence she has, and maybe she doesn't need to be thinking about, her thoughts are not moving in any other fragment of her consciousness. It's just about what would pertain to that date that you're having, or the day, and how you're spending the time. Same thing with you. So what do we have to do to see the whole entirety of my consciousness? Well, just talked about, for the ocean, we have to go in the center of it. So to see the entirety of me, to see the entirety of my consciousness, to be aware of all of my possibilities of who I am, my selfishness, my greed, my interest, my nationality, my religion, my background, my parents, my this and that, so forth, I gotta focus on the center. And what is the center? The center is me, the ego, the me. Everything that I do is about me, because me happen to be the most important, the center of my consciousness, which my consciousness is actually formed around it in proximity of myself. The self, the center, is based on my interest, my selfish interest, my ego, my whatever it is. So that if I focus on me, myself, then I would know what's really the whole thing is, the whole consciousness is made out of. Now, the question goes, so obviously, if I want to see the totality of my consciousness, which includes all my desires, anxiety, and so on, then I gotta go in the focusing, paying full attention to me, to the center, to what makes all that consciousness to become our consciousness. So now we get to the next question of, do we see the movement of the contents of my consciousness. In other words, can I see something while it's moving in its entirety? So in the case of our consciousness, then we're talking about, can I see the fragmentation or fragments of, let's say, part of my thoughts in the field of consciousness? Let's say then, maybe I have a concern about, should I accomplish this certain thing? Well, what happens if I accomplish it? What happens if I don't accomplish it? What are the fears or the good or bad of it if I do or don't accomplish it? What if I have a concern or fear of attachment? What happens if I'm afraid of not getting attached? Or what if I do get attached? What happens if I miss the chance of getting attached? These are the movements of the thoughts in the field of consciousness, but the movements in the field of consciousness are limited to the boundary of consciousness, to the boundary of that thought. It's not beyond the consciousness, so it's limited because consciousness itself is limited. So the movement of the fragment of it is also limited and within the limits of consciousness. So obviously when the whole thing, consciousness, is limited, because remember, one library is limited, it's not all the libraries. My consciousness is one library. If that's limited, then any movements of fragments of content, any movements of the contents of the consciousness, which is limited, will be limited as well. So, therefore, the next question would come to, can I then that means, okay, then we can question that, and that means we can observe that limited movement of the content of a consciousness, which is limited itself. But that whole thing, that I am seeing it as a limited movement of the fragment of content of consciousness, is possible for me to see it because it's limited. But it's not representing the reality. It's not representing the present. So even the movement of the content of my consciousness is a movement of something that doesn't exist, because my whole consciousness is the past, is the accumulation of a bunch of events that they don't exist anymore. It happened at one time. It's not happening now. It's just a memory of it that has formed my consciousness. So the movements of the contents of the consciousness, it's still not representing the reality, not representing the present. So therefore I can never get to know really the reality of my girlfriend or myself if I'm not opening up my consciousness, if I'm not opening up the possibility of living in the present moment and seeing things as they happen, rather than remembering the things that already happened and they're not happening anymore. So in other words, my living today, which is based on my consciousness and the fragments of the contents of the consciousness, is all based on a bunch of dead happenings in the past, which are not alive anymore. So my living today is based on the death of the yesterday. My living, my consciousness, what I am, is based on the past. My consciousness is the past. So therefore its movements are not living either. So my whole consciousness is not living. But I call that living because I'm living based on the contents of my consciousness. which is all dead. Therefore, my living, what I call living, is based on death of yesterday. Things that don't exist anymore. Things that are not alive anymore. That's a tragedy. What we call living is actually is long gone. And we're based our present on the death of yesterday. Which simply tells us we need to open our mind, live in the moment, so we can observe the entirety of what is real, what is happening now, not the entirety, and debate on whether or not I see the entirety of what is dead yesterday, but I really want to know the truth by really examining the entirety of what doesn't even exist anymore. So it seems like we're all oblivious to the fact that what we call living is really long gone. It's like by remembering our loved ones or family members who've already passed away, do they come alive by remembering them? So how do we expect that by thinking about what is in our subconscious and its movements even, we would have any chance of living presently as present happens, and instead we think we are living, but we are really operating in the field of contents of a subconscious, that all these have happened before and they don't exist anymore. So I hope it wasn't too focused, too sad. But what it does tell us is that we need to focus and pay full attention to the present living events, and then live as life happens and develops, and not as it did happen and it developed once then in the past. And that's how, by living in the present, interacting the present, you can see the entirety of yourself and entirety of your girlfriend, and she can see the entirety of you and your thoughts, and that's how you can get to know really the entirety about each other, which could help you for a longer lasting relationship, because now you have all the knowledge and information rather than focusing on the fragment of her thoughts at a certain events and certain dates and certain here and there. All those fragments of her thoughts are already dead, so you really don't get to know and see her as she is today, because you're only focusing on her past and how she was, and she herself is focused on all her behavior and thoughts and contents of her subconscious on what doesn't exist anymore. So really, you two gotta live at the moment and present to know each other as you are, not as you were. And that's why it's so important to live in the present. So hope that would be something to think about, and wish you a wonderful day or evening, and we'll talk later. Night.